All right, guys, so you have chosen this image of the oranges to draw. So I'm going to walk you through how to break this image down into basic forms in order to create the basic structure of this, all right? So first we want to start with the major details that need to be included in your drawing, all right? We got the creases on the orange rind. I'm going to point to that with my mouse. I'm talking about these large lines over here that are coming out of the stem, all right? Next item is the stem. There I'm talking about what I'm circling over here. It's the part that used to be attached to the tree. We want to include also the slices inside the orange. So these triangular shapes over here of the oranges that are cut, this one in half, this one in a quarter, right? You want to include the shape of those slices. And then you also want to draw this flower along with the flower petals. So those are the major details we want to include. All right. If we were to think about what the largest form is, right? The largest forms in the drawings should be pretty clear that the oranges themselves are closest to the sphere, right? It's not really a cylinder, it's not really a cone, it's not a rectangular prism. So we're going to be drawing a bunch of circles today. I'm going to start with the orange that's kind of front and center, the one that's sliced in half, all right? We can't really see the dimensions of it beyond the circular slice, but I want to make sure to draw a circle that's large enough, like what you see here. We want it large enough for us to be able to work in the smaller details like the slices later on. So now that I've mapped that out, looks like for the orange on the left side of this, looks like it's about the same size, okay? So in this case, I'm drawing a circle, but I'm drawing it with the understanding that it's a sphere. All right, I'm not going to worry about that overlap for now. And pretty much right next to it, just about starting from this point, about the same size circle in the back. All right. Now, in terms of the two objects that are left, that's the flower and the quartered orange slice. I'm going to start with the object that's in front. Okay, that's the flower over here. Even though it's not really the outlines of it, it's not a perfect circle at all. But I'm going to draw something. I'm going to draw a circle because it's closest to it. It's slightly smaller than the radius of the oranges. Just something for me to help me to map the petals where they're going to end up. And behind that is the quarter slice of orange. But in order to get that quarter slice, I'm going to draw a full circle. That's a similar size to the oranges that we've seen so far. Actually, that's a little bit offset, but that's okay. I'm just going to cut that in half, right? So now's the time to go in there with an eraser. The object that's in front of everything else is the flower. So I'm going to erase all the lines inside of this circle over here. The object that's kind of second in line is this one, right? That's the orange that's sliced in half. So all the circular arcs within it, I'm going to erase those. Okay. And then I just need half of this circle where I drew that line. So I'm going to erase the top half of it. So there we have a really rough kind of mapping of the major elements in this piece. All right. So let's start with the simpler things first. the oranges that are here and here, we can see the stems, and we can also see some creases on the orange rind. All right, let's start with the stem. Looking at the image, the stem is pretty close to this orange that's sliced in half over here. I'm just going to draw a small circle to start with. And the stems themselves, kind of these small leafy patterns, I can draw those with C-shaped lines. Kind of like that. Adding in the smaller details here. I'm going to draw the stem on this guy. Stem here is a little closer to the right portion of this sphere. And I'm going to draw a tiny oval for where the stem is at. And the petals, those tiny green petals, look something like this. For the creases on the orange rind, I'm going to look at the image and see what that line looks like. Okay? It sort of has a bumpiness to it. It's not a straight line. It kind of meanders a bit. There's another one here. A crease there. Kind of going up this way as well. One coming in from the left side. Okay. Not as many visible creases on this orange, but I do see this one on top. Another one coming out in a V. And some smaller ones over here. I'm going to leave that be. Later on I'm going to come in and clean up the outermost edges of those. Having trouble speaking right now. Okay, so those are the creases on the orange rind and the stems taken care of. Let's see what we can do about the orange slices within the oranges. Okay, starting with this one that's sliced in half. To draw the orange slices, I need a second layer, right, to represent the pith of the orange, the white part, because that's where the orange slices begin. That's where they take their shape. So I'm going to draw a concentric circle. All right, this can be kind of tricky to do. It might take a couple tries to have it perfectly lay within that first circle that we drew. Okay, it's a little thicker than I need. I'm going to put a dot here, just a really small one to represent the center of that orange. And if you notice, if you take a look at that image closely, you can see that there's a kind of star pattern, right? It's like a white star pattern where the orange slices kind of turn back. So here's what I'm going to do. We don't need to follow the image exactly, but we can map out these lines that look something like this, that do pass through that center point we mapped out. Okay, this isn't what we're going to keep, but it is going to help us out with drawing out the actual orange slices. I mean, it's just our construction lines. I'm drawing it a little darker than I normally would, so it's visible on the camera. I'd like you to draw those a lot lighter than that. We can erase the middle of this, because we're going to round off a lot of these edges like this. So we're making that star pattern on the inside. It's okay if it's a little irregular. We are drawing a natural object, and there's inherently things that are, there's variation, you know, it's not a super perfect thing. Okay? Looks like I have more orange slices than our actual image, and that's all right too, right? So we rounded off these guys. We also want to round off at each of these points over here. Okay, add a round a corner, complete it off, rounded corner, rounded corner, and just keep going around until you hit each of those orange slices. Again, if it's not perfectly symmetrical or the same size each slice, don't worry about it. You just want to get it as close as you can, as accurate as you can. Essentially, the name of the game here, guys, is we mapped out the largest things we possibly could. Okay. Oops. Let me make the camera stop shaking right there. Got the largest objects we possibly could. In this case, sphere, sphere, half a sphere, quarter of a sphere, and it's a circle, more like a yeah, it's just a circle here representing a flower. But we're going from big to small. That's what we want to do. Okay, we've also got some orange slices on this quarter orange, but I think I want to leave that for a little bit later. I want to start the flower here, okay? Now the flower, because it's set on a table in the image, the bottom part of it is kind of crumpling towards us. So we want to be aware of that. For now though, at the center of the circle, I'm going to draw a smaller circle. That'll tell me where the center of that flower is. And let's see. Yeah, the petals that I'm going to draw in, I do, on the top portion of the flower, I do want it to follow generally the shape of that, the top portion of that circle I drew. But the bottom, like I said, I don't want it to follow that. I actually want it to be a little more along this line. Okay. So I'm sort of shortening just the bottom portion of that circle. So it kind of reads the same way. From this point, here's how you can draw each flower petal, all right? I would start with like a C-shaped line like that, a small one, that has a sort of hook at the beginning. And I would take it, give you a C-shaped line the other direction, right? Same sort of hook at the top, but curving at a nice angle like that. Okay. The reason why this is a little shorter here is because I want the next petal to overlap it. The hooks at the top want to be small in comparison to these larger curves right there. And if you look at the image of the flower itself, the petals are not this regular, okay? There's variation in terms of where they overlap, the size of them, so we want to keep that into account. We don't want to make this too straight, right? It'll look kind of weird if we do. So in front, there's a petal that's just in front of the rest of them right over here, just about. And we want to put some variation in the overlap. I'm kind of changing my mind over here. I don't think I like the look of these kind of heart-shaped tops. I'm just going to round it out to a slightly pointed petal. I think that's looks a little more natural. All right, so there's a little bit more space here. And if you notice, I am turning my paper as I draw to make it easier for myself to draw some lines at a more natural angle. Excuse me. I'm going to draw another petal here that's sort of sitting on top of these guys. Put a little more space in between some of the petals. And then now I'm approaching the bottom. I want to take another look at the image itself and just study it a bit more. Add another petal here. And then from this point, there's a little more space and the petals seem to get a little bit shorter. Just keeping on going around the circle. If you notice my head movement and where I'm looking, I'm constantly looking back at the reference image to see where to next put my line. I'm not looking for an exact copy, but I do want to be as accurate as possible. All right, almost gone around the whole thing. As you guys are drawing this, I want you to take your time, okay? Like, go way slower than I am going right now. Speed that I'm considering is so that I could make a video that's as short as possible. For you, especially if you're not too familiar with drawing techniques overall, you want to give yourself plenty of time to do this and be patient, okay? So that's looking pretty good. The center of the flower I want to work on. Let me bring up the larger image over here. Yeah, it gets pretty, there's a really interesting texture in the center of that flower. I do want to try and capture that without getting too neurotic about it. It's sort of like these small, tiny C shapes that are radiating from the center and out towards the edge. Okay, I'm going to start with the outermost edge. Just adding in tiny C shapes. Okay, they're not all the same size. I'm kind of varying the distance between the C shapes. And then there's a darker area over here that I want to outline in a similar way. Just tiny C shapes. And they're not all in a row. Kind of like that. Okay. Before I go over here, I just want to define the outermost edge of this central orange, just that portion, okay? I want to define that and darken that in. So I know where the limits are for my, what do you call it, the slices within this piece of the orange. So like I did over here, I'm going to map out the pith of the orange and the thickness of that, the white portion, slightly, right there. I'm going to darken in this outermost line a bit. Okay, I'm marking the approximate center. Very similar to what we already did. I'm going to map out really light construction lines for the slices. I'm going to go back in there and erase this central portion. And I can round out these edges, creating this sort of star pattern. It's not totally void here. There's a pithy portion of this orange that looks sort of like that. At these points, you know, it doesn't quite look like it. We want to round off these corners as well. Small but important detail, if you notice in the image, we can see a little bit, a tiny sliver of the orange rind right there. Now all there's left to do is clean this up, right? I don't need this construction line of the circle for the flower anymore. And I want to go back in there and darken in some of the outlines, right? The outermost lines of these oranges. I'm going to start with this orange. But here's a trick, guys. The blade of my hand is about to sit on the on the flower that I just drew. And if I were to start working here, that's going to smudge this, okay? One thing you can do to prevent that is put another piece of paper over where your hand's going to be, so you don't mess with the lines that you work so hard on drawing right there. Okay, so I'm going to darken in this circle just portion by portion, nice and slow. I'm trying to keep the thickness as consistent as possible. If there's some irregularity, again, don't stress about it. If you notice, I'm turning the paper as I go to work with the natural motion of my wrist, right? Your wrist has a natural radius to it. You want to work with that, you want to work with your body. I'm going to change the thickness of this just slightly. Clean it up so it looks a little more even. And then the last thing that's left is the outermost lines of the last two oranges right there. Just go one small segment at a time. Rotate your paper as you go. Use your wrist, keep your fingers pretty stationary. There we go. Looking at it now, I can see that I made the stem a little larger than it should be, but that's okay. I'm not going to stress about it too much. Last orange. I think I want to start from this portion for this one. All right. Go back in there, clean up some of these lines. You don't have to get rid of every single one of your construction lines, but just get rid of the ones that are kind of detracting from the cleanness of the image. Okay, so there you have it. That's how to break down an image like this, first into spheres and circles, and then go from large to small in terms of the details like that. All right, good luck.